Ever since my brother and I were born, our mother has made us wear lie detector collars. And whenever we tell a lie, a red light comes on. The moment it turns red, she presses a remote and shocks me. She says it will help form muscle memory to correct the bad character in me. Daniel's collar is always green, even when he tears my mom's favorite clothes to shreds and calmly claims a dog does it. The collar still glows green. But I am different. Even if I just say, "Mom, I'm thirsty," the collar would suddenly flash a blinding red light. Then a current shoots through my neck and into my body, making me tremble in pain. At first, I try to explain, but my mom always says the same thing. The machine doesn't lie. You have to feel pain to learn. I'm doing this for your own good. After being shocked thousands of times, I slowly start to believe that maybe I'm truly born a liar. On Christmas Day, my mother was getting ready to take my brother, Daniel Benson, to watch the fireworks, when I felt a sudden, violent pain in my stomach. I curled up on the floor, breaking out into a cold sweat. "Mom, help me. My stomach hurts." My voice was shaking, but the collar around my neck started flashing red like crazy. Mom stood over me, staring down at me without a hint of emotion. She dialed the shock up to the highest setting. "So now you're pretending to be sick just to go watch fireworks with us? How could you even think to put on such a fake show? It's revolting. You're seriously rotten to the core." She grabbed Daniel and walked off. The door slammed shut, and the bang made my ears ring. I couldn't help thinking maybe she was right. Since the collar was flashing red, that meant I couldn't really be in pain. I must just be me, pretending to be pitiful, and trying to get attention again. I couldn't be any more sorry, Mom. If there were a next life, I would definitely try to become a more honest person. It hurts. The pain had me trembling all over. I clawed at the floor, leaving claw marks behind. Just then, the doorknob suddenly turned. Hope flickered in my eyes. Mom came back. Since she was a doctor, she must have realized something was wrong with me. She must have come back to save me. "Are you still not done with your act? The fireworks are about to start." Danny's already getting impatient. Standing at the doorway, she looked annoyed. "Mom." Using the last bit of strength I had left to speak, I reached a hand out toward her. "It really hurts. Feels like my intestines are being torn apart." She glanced at the wildly flashing red light on my collar. Before crouching beside me, grabbing my chin, she angrily snapped, "Irene Benson, how long are you going to keep this up? Lying has become a habit for you, hasn't it? Stay here and reflect on yourself." Dad's voice came from the doorway. "Honey, hurry up. The fireworks show is about to start. Irene will be staying at home, right? Should we leave her some food?" Standing up, Mom dusted off her hands as if she just touched something dirty. "Why should we? She's got a pile of snacks in her cabinet that she bought with the money she stole last time. She won't starve." Turning to me, she added, "Let's lock the door. She's not allowed out until that collar turns green." Dad hesitated. "But what?" Mom cut him off immediately. "Being too soft on kids just ruins them. Look at how well-behaved Danny is. His collar is always green. Someone like Irene is just born bad. She needs to be corrected." But there was nothing in my cabinet at all. Daniel was the one who took that money back. Then he was the one who ate those snacks too. He had been standing right there at the time, his collar glowing a soft green as he said it wasn't him. And Mom believed him. But when I had said it wasn't me, the red light lit up instantly, followed by another shock to my neck. I watched Mom turn and walk away. Poking his head around the door, Daniel stuck his tongue out at me. "Bye, Irene. We're going to watch the super pretty fireworks now." The collar around his neck was glowing bright green. What a nice color. With a bang, the door slammed shut. The sound of the door locking was like a blow straight to my heart. The house became terrifyingly quiet all at once. I was the only one left at home, with my stomach aching like it was being sliced open, even though it hurt a lot. Mom said that machines would never lie. My collar was red, so I really had to be lying. It didn't hurt. This pain wasn't real. I cried while desperately telling myself those things. After a long time had passed, it really did seem like it didn't hurt as much anymore. I used all the strength I had to crawl toward my desk. I needed to write a self-reflection. That was the rule in this house. Whenever the collar flashed red, I had to write 1,000 words. The content was always just one sentence. "I am a liar." Mom would forgive me once I was done, right? Maybe she would even take me to the hospital. Then, with incredibly shaky hands, I opened the crumpled notebook. It was densely filled with my past reflection essays. All I used to write were sentences like, "I'm sorry I was wrong. I won't lie again." But this time I wanted to write some truths. My vision grew blurry and tears kept falling as I slowly wrote. I really love you. I really am in pain. Why won't you believe me? Can you believe me just this once, Mom?" The moment I finished writing my last word, the pain in my stomach suddenly vanished. The feeling was replaced by a strange lightness I had never felt before. It felt like I had become weightless. And I was slowly floating upward. Looking down, I saw myself slumped over the desk. My hand hung in midair, and I was perfectly still. The collar around my neck was still flashing. And non-stop. Oh, I was already dead. I still didn't know how to be an honest child. I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know how long it had been. The sound of laughter woke me up. It was Mom, Dad, and Daniel. The fireworks were so beautiful. That smiley face. One was especially adorable. Just like our Danny. Mom sounded genuinely happy, and I'd never heard her use such a gentle tone before. While floating in the air, I watched the front door open. I instinctively drifted over to them, ready to do what I always did, which was to greet them with water. That urge to please them was practically part of me by now. Mom. I spread my arms, wanting to hug her. It doesn't hurt anymore. I'll be good from now on. Please don't be angry with me anymore. At last, my hands went right through her, as if she were made of nothing. Mom abruptly shuddered. She frowned, asking, why is it so cold? In here? Did we not turn on the heater? I looked down at my translucent hands. Oh right. I was dead. The dead couldn't touch the living. Dad casually said, go check on Irene. She hasn't come out to eat. We can't actually let her go hungry. I looked at Mom expectantly. If she found out I was dead, would she be sad? Would she feel remorse? Letting out a cold snort, Mom walked toward my room. If she starves, that's on her. She pretended to be sick just to get attention. That's what happens when we spoil her too much. When she opened my door, she noticed the lights were off. With the aid of the light spilling from the living room, she spotted me slumped over my desk, motionless as if asleep. She stood there with her arms crossed, sarcasm thick in her voice. Oh, you're lying there now. You think acting pitiful will get me to carry you to bed? Irene, you're 10. You're no longer a 5-year-old. Standing beside her, I screamed desperately, Mom. I'm not acting. I'm already dead. Just touch me. My body is already cold to the touch. But she couldn't hear me. She only believed what she wanted to see. Dad looked in from the doorway. Should we carry her to her bed? It's winter. She'll catch a cold. Mom cut him off instantly. Why should we? Kids these days are spoiled. Even the experts say so. This kind of behavior needs to be corrected with cold treatment. She has to realize her mistake on her own. She pointed at the red light on my collar. See this? It's still red. That means she's still acting out on the inside. She hasn't reflected at all. That's enough. Let's head to bed. We still have to visit my parents tomorrow. She turned to leave, pulling the door shut behind her and locking it. Floating beside my body, I stared at the glaring red light in the darkness. Chill in my heart felt colder than death itself. If Mom had just taken one step closer and touched my hand, she would have realized that I had already gone completely cold. But she didn't. She trusted only that emotionless device, not the daughter she carried for 10 months. The next morning, sunlight fell on my body, though it brought no warmth. From the kitchen came the clinking of pots and pans. Mom was making breakfast. The smell of eggs slipped through the crack of the door. That used to be my favorite smell. However, I was only ever allowed boiled vegetables before. Because Mom said liars didn't deserve anything else. Green still hasn't come out yet? Dad asked. He was sitting at the table, reading the newspaper. Mom slammed a plate down. No. She's as stubborn as a mule. This is all because we've spoiled her. If she doesn't want to eat, then so be it. Daniel sipped his milk, his eyes rolling with mischief. He then ran over to my door and deliberately sniffed loudly. Explain. Aiming exaggeratedly. Mom. Irene's room smells so bad. Did she poop and pee in there? I floated by the door, looking at Daniel with a bitter smile. With the heating on full blast, I had already started to rot after just one night. Mom would hate me even more now. Mom walked over with a frown. She banged on my door, yelling, Irene, are you a pig? The toilet's just right there. Do you not have legs? How could you poop in your room? You're seriously beyond help. Did you seriously have to do something so embarrassing? Just to spite me? Mom waved her hand in disgust, like she was shooting a fly. Leave her. Let her stay in that stench and choke on it. Dad put down his newspaper, frowning. The smell is seriously strong. I'll go check. Maybe there's a dead rat or something. He got up and walked toward my door, making my heart lurch in an instant. Dad, open the door quickly. Please look at me. I'm just beyond the door. If he just turned the handle, he would see that I couldn't move anymore. And he would see how dark my face had become. I floated in front of Dad, waving frantically, trying to get his attention. Just as his hand rested on the doorknob, the shrill sound of a phone ringing cut through the air. Dad's boss was calling when he answered the call. He went pale instantly. What? The server crashed? Okay. I'll be there right away. He hung up before grabbing his coat in a rush. Honey, something urgent came up at work. I've got to go. I might not be back for a few days. Hey, but what about Irene? Mom hadn't finished her sentence. when Dad had already slammed the door and left. I froze as well. He was so close. If only the call had come a second later, I would already have been found. Maybe then I wouldn't have had to keep rotting like this. That afternoon, Mom took Daniel out shopping, leaving my body at home. By evening, they came back with a bunch of premium seafood and gifts. Soon as they stepped inside, they noticed that the smell had gotten even stronger. Pinching her nose, Mom gagged a little. Irene, are you trying to turn this house into a dump? She wouldn't even open my door to yell at me, as if one more glance toward my room would ruin her eyes. She grabbed a roll of wide tape, crouched down, and aggressively sealed the bottom of my door. If you like the stench so much, then you can stay in there and breathe it all you want. Just keep it away from us. After putting down the last strip of tape, she dusted off her hands in satisfaction. That's better. Then she went to the kitchen to cook the seafood. I stared at the sealed door, feeling the last bit of hope in me get smothered with that strip of tape. On the third morning, though the winter sunlight filled the living room, it couldn't drive away the chill in the house. The heating was cranked up to 79 degrees Fahrenheit, so it was fairly warm inside. And because of the heat, the tape could no longer contain the thick, nauseating stench of decay. Mom was trimming the fresh flowers she bought, but no matter how strong the fragrance was, it couldn't mask the odor. With a snap, she cut the stem of a rose so hard that a thorn pierced her finger. She finally couldn't take it anymore. Irene, you really don't know when to stop. She stormed into the kitchen, grabbed a rolling pin, and stalked toward my room in a rage. I'm going to beat you to death today, you filthy brat. Clearly the shocks aren't enough. You need to feel real pain. I floated in front of her, staring at her twisted face as I desperately tried to block her path. Don't go in, Mom. You can't. I'm hideous. I'm already rotting. It'll shock you. Even if she didn't love me, I still didn't want her to see me like that. But after storming straight through me, she ripped the tape off the door. The sound harsh and grating. She shoved the spare key into the lock and turned it, before kicking the door open. With a bang, the door hit the wall and rebounded slightly. Mom stood on the threshold, the rolling pin gripped so tightly in her hand that her knuckles were entirely white. The words of abuse were already sitting on her tongue, ready to be spat out like venom. But the words never came. The moment the door opened, the stagnant, suffocating heat of the room rushed out to meet her. It wasn't just a bad smell anymore. It was a physical wall of putrefaction, the distinct, heavy, sickly sweet odor of decaying meat and ruptured bowels. I floated just inches from her face, screaming silently, "Don't look. Please. Mom, don't look." She didn't hear me. Her eyes darted to the bed, finding it empty before snapping down to the desk. Irene was still there. I was still there. My body was slumped over the wooden surface, but I no longer looked like a 10-year-old girl. The intense heat of the radiators had accelerated the inevitable. My skin had bloated, stretching tight against my clothes mottled with horrifying shades of purplish black and sickly green. Fluids had pooled beneath my chair, staining the carpet in a dark, sticky halo, and around my swollen, discolored neck, digging violently into the decaying flesh. The collar was still blinking. Blink, blink, blink. A brilliant, cheerful crimson in the dark room, calling a dead girl a liar. Mom's face went entirely slack. The rolling pin slipped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Her chest stopped moving. For 10 full seconds, she did not breathe. She didn't blink. "Irene," she whispered. The commanding, arrogant tone was gone. Her voice was thin like a child's. She took a step forward, her expensive slippers squelching slightly on the edge of the fluid stain. She reached out a trembling hand and touched my shoulder. The flesh gave way under her fingers. It felt like pressing into a rotting peach. Mom recoiled, letting out a sharp, choked gasp. She stumbled backward, hitting the doorframe, her hands flying to her mouth as her stomach violently rejected her breakfast. She gagged, dry heaving into the hallway, her perfectly styled hair falling in messy strands over her face. I hovered beside her. A tiny, pathetic ember of hope flared in my ghostly chest. She's crying, I thought. She realizes she was wrong. She loves me. Mom wiped her mouth with the back of her trembling hand. She slowly stood up, her chest heaving. She looked back into the room, her eyes fixing not on my bloated face, but on the notebook trapped beneath my rotting hand. She pinched her nose, holding her breath, and stepped back into the suffocating room. With 2 fingers, she pinched the corner of the notebook and carefully pulled it free. The paper was slightly damp, but the ink was legible. I floated over her shoulder as she read my final words. "Mom, I really love you. I really am in pain. Why won't you believe me? Can you believe me just this once, Mom?" I waited for the tears. I waited for her to scream, to fall to her knees, to beg the heavens for forgiveness. I waited for the mother I had spent 10 years trying to earn. Instead, her eyes narrowed. The terror in her face hardened, freezing into something utterly cold and calculated. Selfish, she hissed. I froze. Selfish little bitch, Mom whispered, her voice shaking, but not with grief. It was rage. Even in death, you're trying to ruin me. A ruptured appendix? Peritonitis. Her medical brain was already diagnosing the corpse. They'll do an autopsy. They'll say it was neglect. They'll take my license. She looked down at the notebook. Without a second of hesitation, she ripped the page out, crumpled it into a ball, and shoved it deep into her pocket. The last ember of love I had for my mother extinguished. It didn't fizzle out. It was crushed into dust. In its place, a hollow, freezing emptiness settled into my spirit. I didn't want her hugs anymore. I didn't want her to touch me. I just stared at her, this monster wearing a woman's skin, finally seeing her for what she truly was. Mommy, why does it smell like dead rats? Daniel's voice echoed from the living room. Footsteps approached. Mom practically flew out of the room, slamming the door shut behind her and leaning her entire body weight against it. She caught Daniel just as he rounded the corner. Danny, she said, her voice strained, forcing a terrifyingly bright smile. Danny, sweetheart, listen to Mommy. Daniel stopped, looking up at her with large, empty eyes. The green light on his collar cast a sickly glow on his chin. What's wrong, Mommy? You have a stain on your shoe. Listen to me, she said, grabbing his shoulders so hard he winced. Irene ran away. Daniel blinked, but the door was locked. She opened the window and ran away. Mom repeated, her voice dropping to a hypnotic, demanding whisper. She stole money and ran away because she is a bad, lying girl. Do you understand? Daniel looked at the closed door, then back at his mother. A slow, chilling smile crept onto his 10-year-old face. Okay, Mommy. Irene ran away. His collar flashed. A steady bright green. I floated in the hallway, staring at my brother's collar. It was measuring his heart rate, his sweat, his anxiety. And there was none. Daniel was perfectly calm. He was lying through his teeth, and he felt absolutely nothing. Mom let out a breath of relief. Good boy. Now go to your room and put your headphones on. Mommy has to clean up a big mess. For the next 4 hours, I watched my mother operate with the cold precision of a surgeon. She opened all the windows in the living room, letting the freezing winter air rush in. She brought in thick, heavy-duty trash bags, industrial bleach, and rubber gloves. She was going to throw me away. Like garbage. Like I was nothing. She was dragging the first roll of plastic sheeting toward my bedroom when the front door handle clicked. Mom froze. Dad walked in looking exhausted, his briefcase heavy in his hand. The servers are finally up, he sighed, kicking off his shoes. I thought I'd be there until midnight, but the IT guys pulled a miracle. He stopped. He sniffed the air. The bleach was strong, but beneath it, the sickeningly sweet scent of decay lingered in the cold draft. Why is it freezing in here? And what is that awful smell? Dad asked, walking further into the hall. He saw Mom standing frozen, wearing heavy yellow rubber gloves, holding a roll of black plastic. Honey, what are you doing? Don't, Mom said, her voice cracking. Don't go back there. But Dad was already looking at my door. The tape had been ripped off. The wood was splintered where she had kicked it. Where is Irene? He asked. She ran away, Mom blurted out. Dad stared at her. Then why do you look like you're about to clean up a crime scene? He pushed past her. David, stop. Dad grabbed the handle and shoved the door open. I watched my father's mind break. It happened almost instantly. He took one look at my desk, at the horrific, bloated mass of rotting flesh wearing his daughter's clothes, and his knees simply gave out. He collapsed to the floor, letting out a sound that wasn't human. A guttural, tearing shriek of absolute agony. He crawled backward, scrambling frantically away from the door, tears streaming down his face, vomit spilling over his lips and onto his expensive shirt. Oh my God. Oh my God, Irene. God, no. He grabbed his hair, rocking back and forth on the hallway floor. What happened? What did you do? I didn't do anything, Mom shrieked, dropping the plastic and kneeling beside him, grabbing his face. She was sick. She didn't say anything. She was crying for help on Christmas. Dad roared, pushing her away. Her collar was red. You said she was faking. The machine said she was lying. Mom screamed back, pointing a frantic, trembling finger at my open door. Look at it. It's still red. She was a liar. David. She just had a stomach ache and she let herself die to spite us. Dad looked at her, as if she were an alien. The realization of her insanity seemed to finally pierce through his years of cowardice and submission. He reached for his pocket. I'm calling the police. I'm calling an ambulance. No. Mom lunged at him, slapping the phone out of his hand. It clattered down the hallway. Are you insane? Look at her, David. She's rotting. They'll say we locked her in there. They'll charge us with manslaughter, child abuse. They'll put us in prison. We did lock her in there. Dad sobbed, his face buried in his hands. We killed her. We are not going to prison. Mom grabbed him by the lapels, shaking him violently. Think about Daniel. If we go to jail, Danny goes into the foster system. He'll be ruined. Is that what you want? To lose both your children? Dad froze. The fight drained out of him, replaced by a pathetic, hollow cowardice. He looked at the phone on the floor, then at Mom, then at Daniel, who had peeked his head out of his bedroom, his headphones still around his neck. Dad lowered his head and began to weep silently. What do we do? We bag her, Mom said, her voice dropping to a dead, clinical whisper. We put her in the trunk. Tonight, we drive up to the state park. We bury her deep. Then, we come home, tear up the carpet, bleach the subfloor, and tomorrow, we call the police and say she ran away. I floated above them. I felt no anger toward my father anymore. Just pity. Was a weak, pathetic man, easily broken, easily led. Get up, Mom commanded. Put these gloves on. Dad reached out with a trembling hand to take the rubber gloves. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed through the frozen, silent house like a gunshot. Dad recoiled. Mom spun toward the front door, her eyes wide with terror. Police department. A deep voice called from outside. Open the door, please. We're doing a wellness check. Mom's face drained of the last drops of its color. She looked at Dad, mouthed the word silence, and quickly stripped off her rubber gloves, kicking them behind a decorative plant. She smoothed her hair, took a deep breath, and walked to the front door. I drifted right through the walls to stand on the porch. 2 police officers stood there. One was an older man with graying temples, Officer Miller. The other was a younger woman, Officer Vance. Mom opened the door just a crack, putting on a confused, polite smile. Hello, officers. Is there a problem? Dr. Benson? Officer Miller asked. We received a call from your daughter, Irene's school. They said she hasn't logged into her virtual classes since before Christmas, and they couldn't reach you by phone. Oh, Mom laughed nervously. Yes, I'm so sorry. My phone has been having issues. Irene is fine. She's been very rebellious lately. She actually ran away this morning. My husband and I were just about to come down to the station to file a report. Officer Vance frowned. She leaned slightly toward the crack in the door. I saw her nose twitch. Ran away? Vance asked. In 20-degree weather? Yes, she took some money, Mom lied smoothly. She's a troubled child. We've been trying to help her. Ma'am, do you mind if we step inside? Miller asked. He wasn't smiling anymore. His hand rested casually near his radio. Actually, this isn't a good time, Mom said, starting to push the door closed. We are very distressed. Officer Vance put a heavy boot against the door, stopping it from closing. Dr. Benson, there is a very strong odor coming from your house. We need to step inside. You don't have a warrant. Mom's voice pitched up into panic. Exigent circumstances, ma'am, Miller said, shoving the door open. Mom stumbled back. The officers stepped into the entryway. The moment they were fully inside, the freezing draft from the open windows couldn't hide the smell anymore. Officer Vance gagged, pulling her collar up over her nose. Miller drew his weapon, his eyes scanning the hallway. They saw Dad sitting on the floor, weeping, covered in his own vomit. They saw the black plastic bags. And then they saw the open door at the end of the hall. Nobody move. Miller shouted, pointing his gun at Dad, then at Mom. Vance drew her weapon and moved cautiously down the hallway. I floated beside Officer Vance as she approached my room. She peered around the doorframe, her gun raised. She lowered her weapon. Her hands began to shake violently. Oh, sweet Jesus. She whispered. She clicked her radio. Dispatch, we have a signal 30. We need forensics, detectives, and a coroner at this address right now. Send backup. We have a deceased child. Mom collapsed to her knees. It was over. The house turned into a circus of flashing red and blue lights. Detectives swarmed the rooms. Flashbulbs went off in my bedroom, capturing the horrific reality of what I had become. Paramedics brought out a body bag, zipping my decaying shell inside. I watched them carry me away, feeling nothing but a strange, distant relief. Mom and Dad were handcuffed and placed in separate squad cars. Daniel was taken by a female officer, wrapped in a blanket, and put into an unmarked car for Child Protective Services. I followed my mother. The interrogation room was cold and stark. Mom sat at the metal table, her wrists handcuffed to the ring bolted to the surface. She had regained some of her arrogant composure. She was a doctor. She knew the law. She thought she was smarter than all of them. Detective Harris, a tired-looking man with dark circles under his eyes, walked in and tossed a file onto the table. Beside the file, he placed an evidence bag. Inside the bag was my collar. The red light had finally died. It was just an ugly plastic band now. Dr. Benson, Harris said, sitting down. Autopsy is preliminary, but they didn't need long. Burst appendix. Massive internal infection. She was dying for at least 3 days. She was in agonizing, unspeakable pain. Mom lifted her chin. I didn't know. She lied constantly. We used a behavioral modification device, the collar. It read her vitals. If she lied, it turned red. She said her stomach hurt, but the collar was red. I thought she was faking to ruin our Christmas. A behavioral modification device, Harris repeated flatly. Yes. It's perfectly legal. We were trying to correct her. Mom leaned forward. It's a tragedy. A medical anomaly. But it is not murder. Harris stared at her for a long time. Then he opened the file. We had our tech department look at the collars, Harris said softly. Both. Irene's, which we pulled off her neck, and Daniel's, which we confiscated from him tonight. Mom blinked, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her eyes. Here's the funny thing about Daniel's collar, Harris said, pulling out a photo of my brother's green collar. We opened it up. There are no biometric sensors. Inside. There's no heart rate monitor, no galvanic skin response pads. It's just a plastic shell with a battery and a green LED light that stays on permanently. Mom said nothing. And then we opened Irene's, Harris continued, his voice dropping an octave, heavy with disgust. He pulled out a photo of the torn-apart wiring of my red collar. There were sensors in hers, but they weren't connected to the light. The light was wired to a remote receiver. And we found the remote, Dr. Benson, in your purse. The silence in the room was absolute. I floated above the table, looking down at the woman who gave birth to me. You didn't have a lie detector, Harris said, leaning in until he was inches from her face. You had a torture device. You pressed a button in your pocket to shock your own daughter whenever she spoke, just to punish her. You conditioned her to believe she was intrinsically broken. And when she was dying on your floor begging for her life, you pressed the button again to make it look like she was lying. You tortured her to death, doctor. Mom's jaw trembled. Her arrogant facade cracked, then shattered. She was bad, Mom stammered. She looked exactly like my mother-in-law. She had that same wretched, judgmental face. She needed to be broken. I was fixing her. You're a monster, Harris said quietly. He stood up. Your husband gave us a full confession. He told us about the tape on the door. He told us about the plastic bags. You're going to rot in prison, Dr. Benson. And I'm going to make sure the inmates know exactly what you did to your little girl. Harris walked out, slamming the heavy steel door behind him. Mom was left alone in the cold room. She stared at the plastic collar in the evidence bag. Her breathing grew rapid, shallow. She began to pull at her handcuffs, her wrists chafing raw against the metal. It's not my fault, she whispered to the empty room. She was a liar. I was a good mother. I am a good mother. I drifted down until I was sitting directly across the table from her. She couldn't see me, but she suddenly stopped struggling. She shivered violently, her breath misting in the sudden, unnatural chill of the room. She looked up at the empty chair where I sat. I reached out my translucent, glowing hand. I didn't want a hug anymore. I didn't want her validation. I slowly placed my hand over hers. Mom let out a blood-curdling scream, yanking her hand back as if she had been burned, though my touch was as cold as the grave. She backed her chair up until it hit the wall, her eyes wide, staring at the empty space where I sat. Irene, she sobbed, terror completely consuming her. Irene, stay away from me. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. She's lying, I thought. I stood up. The heavy chains of obligation, the desperate need for a mother's love that had anchored my soul to this miserable world, finally snapped. I looked at the red collar in the bag one last time. I knew the truth now. I wasn't a liar. I was just a little girl who wanted to be loved. And I was free. The interrogation room, my weeping mother, the cold metal walls, they all began to fade into a brilliant, blinding white light. It wasn't the harsh, angry red of the collar. It was warm. It was peaceful. I closed my eyes, stepped into the light, and never looked back.